All right, good afternoon, everyone. I can promise you that I will keep this on schedule because as soon as this is over, I'm catching a flight to Greensboro, North Carolina to watch the Yukon women take on the North Carolina women. So I love you all, but I'm not missing my flight. So my name's Joe DeLong. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. I'm happy and privileged to be the moderator for this next panel. It's interesting, when Rob Hodling reached out and asked me if I would do this, I thought, you know, Rob was once up on a stage of people that I moderated at one time in a debate, and I was trying to figure out if he thought I did a really good job or if he thought asking me to moderate a panel of my bosses would be his revenge. So I guess we'll see how that works. But the way we're going to kick this thing off, what are we talking about? Are we talking about affordable housing today? Is that what we're? No. Okay, not zoning. Okay. Not zoning. Well, we'll have a better conversation then. So the way we're going to kick things off is I'm going to go right down the line, and I'm going to let each of these municipal CEOs introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves and the communities that they represent. So, Mike, you want to start?
Sure. I'm Michael Criss, first selectman for the town of Harwinton. Smaller town, about 5,700 people in the town, 31 square miles. I'm also the vice chair for the Northwest COG and the legislative chair for the Northwest COG and chairman of the Northwest Transit District. And I work with Joe and Cost and everybody else. I see Catherine's here, and we talk about, we do a lot of different things in our community, but rural towns, obviously, our concern as small towns is always being treated as equals as bigger cities for the money when it comes out. And we advocate a lot about that in equality of that spending and that distribution of those funds between the communities, and that our communities as a whole typically are trying to invest, but with limited tax base, it makes it very difficult to do that. So we need the state's help in order to do that, and we enjoy working with the state, and CCM and Cost have been huge advocates for rural communities, and we continue to work with them to try to design plans that will work for everybody and balance that out for all of us. So thank you.
All right, thank you. My name is Brian Foley. I want to thank the Commissioner Barton, and everyone that put this together, and thank you for inviting me. Again, my name is Brian Foley. I'm the town manager in the small town of Tolland, Connecticut, out towards Yukon that way, right along 84. 24 years as a cop in this city here. Prior to that, or after that, 3 years with the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. Now comfortably home as a town manager in the town of Tolland. We face a lot of unique challenges. We're at a very high elevation, where our town symbol is a rock, and our entire town is built on rock. So if we want to dig anything, you don't need a shovel, that's for sure. You need a sledgehammer. So thank you.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here from northeastern Connecticut. My name's Maureen Nicholson. I'm the first selectman in the town of Pomfret. Also, I'll add I was the first woman elected in 300 years. Our town is 313 years old, 40 square miles, 70 miles of road, and a road crew of 5. We struggle with infrastructure, and there's a lot of reasons which we're going to get to today. I'm fortunate because I came into office and I have a background with some knowledge on construction. I had a degree in landscape architecture and regional planning, but a lot of people come into office as a first selectman and don't have that kind of experience, and the difficulty in having a Department of Public Works that can address all of the varied issues that we have had in the past and the new challenges that we are facing in the future. We've had events in Pomfret, which I'm sure everybody's had, that are unprecedented. Volumes of water, snow, beavers. Right? So I look forward to this discussion today and hope we all learn something. Thank you.
Well, between Mike and Maureen, they just answered every question I had on my list, except beavers. I didn't have beavers written down here, so
big problem in rural Connecticut.
Yeah, big. Yeah. That is definitely a small rural discussion to have in these challenges. So I think what we'll start off with, Mike, I'm going to begin with you and go down the line, then we'll mix it up a little bit, obviously. But I just want to give each of you an opportunity to share kind of your most critical infrastructure projects, the things that are really on the horizon, or things that you really have planned for your communities that you feel need to happen in the short term, and maybe even some that have to happen more in the long term, and it may be a little bit of the challenges of that work and getting it done. Okay.
Well, I think as a small community, I mean, I'm serving my 7th term, so it takes a little while. They're 2-year terms, so it's a year and a half to learn the job when you get in, and I think infrastructure's changed tremendously over that 14 years. And the biggest problems we see is obviously affordability, but we try to focus a lot on our bridges and our dams. A lot of the dams in rural towns, at least in our rural community in Northwest Corner, are privately owned. So they're, you have a homeowner that all of a sudden realizes that they're responsible for part of that dam, and you have to bring those partners together. So we have some dam infrastructures that are big, but a lot of the things that we tackled over these years is really investment in bridges. Bridges has been the biggest investment, and obviously paving, widening some of the roadways, creating walkability in some of the rural towns is difficult, as the narrow roads in most of our communities doesn't allow for biking or walking safely. Street lights are limited, so that's another thing. People are talking a lot about illumination, but then they talk about light pollution. So you got both sides of it in a rural community, and I always say, in a small town, it's where the rubber meets the road. We get every single call as a first selectman. You get every call. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be, John down the street isn't mowing his lawn, and you didn't fix that pothole, by the way, while I got you on the phone. So, and you start talking to people like that. In bigger cities, you have layers that you have to kind of go through, and you've got the expenditures and the money to plan large infrastructure projects. We have to take small bites, so it could take several years before we get to a substantial infrastructure project, because there's so much planning and there's so much upfront money that we invest into those projects in order to get them just to the table. And then it could be years before we get funding for those, and as we know, the pricing structure for cost of doing things has gone significantly up and is making it difficult to tackle a project if it spans over a year. And then close out of that particular project could take multiple years to free up that money to move it to another project. So those are the difficulties that we're facing, and a lot of the infrastructure projects that we're focused on are obviously bridge safety. We tend to be a pass-through community. I call it a pass-through community because we have Route 4, Route 118, Route 8, everything comes through our community. So we deal with a lot of things, and we work with DOT a lot on those safety, speed, all of those things that we're looking at when we do a project. And it's not just, I think a lot of people think just pave the road. Well, it's not just paving the road. You have to look at the drainage. You have to look at the actual curbing. You have to look at water flow shielding. You have to look at icing. You have to look at all of these things when you're looking in a rural community. And I'm sure in a big city you're thinking about that, but they have that infrastructure that tends to be a little more ahead. I think in rural communities, we're not classified as distressed communities, even though I think my colleagues would agree that we are distressed. Yeah. We do need the help, and we are distressed, and many of the roads need attention. But with limited manpower, DPWs are smaller. Projects we can't handle in-house, so you have to hire them out, tend to cost more. So it takes a little bit of time, but we're working a lot on those bridges and designing the roads to better shield water off those roadways and icing problems that we've had over the years, and correcting the right way rather than doing it 3-4 times the wrong way. So.
All right, thank you. So I have to say the Department of Transportation has been very good to us in the town of Tolland in regards to bridge repair and culvert repair, as it seems like we always have multiple projects that have been ongoing. But really the cost of paving, and I'm sure it's for every town, it's impossible for us to keep up with. We just passed a $7 million referendum for the next 5 years. It used to be a $5 million referendum for 5 years, but the cost of paving, we were paying roughly, I think, $3 million a mile, and it's up to $6 to $7 million. I'm sorry, $6 to $7 million, I believe, to do a mile. So it's a lot of money now to pave the roads, and of course the water drainage and stuff, that all comes in it there. So I guess our greatest infrastructure need is trying to keep up with the cost of paving. But The cost of paving is nibbled down by mother education, and paying for education in our town is always obviously a priority, and then we do what we can after that. The town of Tolland's on I-84 and has great potential for economic development. It's already a great, as far as residential development, and we're very heavy there, but it's on 84, so we have great potential. But as I mentioned before, we're entirely built on ledge, so to run a water line, to run a sewer line is incredibly costly because we're going to be running through rock at some point. Moreover, it's very hilly, so if we're going to run water and sewer, we need pumps and pump houses to do it. So there's just so many. We have a water line running. We have Connecticut Water close by. They have a very limited part of our town, and we would love to expand it. So is it a need as much as paving the roads? Not nearly as much of a need, but we'd like to be a little more self-sufficient with a better tax base so we can better fund all of our places and include education. So again, it comes down to really, boy, we really need money to pay for, I guess, education, but we need money for the paving of our roads and infrastructure.
Thank you. I'll piggyback on my colleagues' comments here. I don't want to repeat what they have to say because we all have those same issues. Some of the things that I'm facing in my community, it's time, money, and expertise. We recently had a Department of Public Works, our director retired, and I couldn't find a replacement, excuse me, for that position. That's really challenging when you don't have somebody in that seat. That's the largest part of our budget, and if I don't have someone with experience that's making those decisions, you're risking disaster. And we did have a disaster, actually. Some material went down on a road when I was not in office, someone else was in office, and they put some material down on a road that they were sold that was going to rejuvenate the road, and the road had to be torn up, and it became a huge cost to us because that person that made that decision didn't have experience and didn't have the knowledge to go with the job. I recently had 2 members of our Public Works Department retire. It's very hard to find people that want to take those jobs. And people are retiring because they don't want to plow, they don't want to go out at night, they don't want to be in a blizzard at 3 in the morning on a dark road. So that's one of our biggest challenges. We have several. One of them is beavers, I'll have to say that. Our road crew has to monitor several beaver dams in town because they flood the roads and create a lot of damage. Unprecedented rainfall. We have had washouts of roads, culverts that have washed out, extremely expensive infrastructure problems because of unprecedented precipitation that we never anticipated in these parts of town that they would wash out. We have 7 miles of unpaved roads, so every time we have a large rain event, those are the most expensive roads to maintain. Several of them are scenic roads, so we can't pave them. Several of them have residents on them that don't want the road paved, but maintenance per mile on a gravel road is much more expensive than a paved road. What else? Oh, continuity. I want to talk about that. I think it's really important to talk about the person in the hot seat in the town. As the CEO, when you come into office and you have a 2-year term as a first selectman, you are not paying attention to infrastructure, I'll tell you that. The first 2 years, you're just trying to figure out where to go and where the bathroom is. I changed my term to 4 years, and every town that has that first selectman can do that. So there's 2 towns in the state of Connecticut that have 4-year terms for their first selectman. It's Pomfret and Sterling. I'm also the chairman of the Northeastern Connecticut Council of Governments. A few years ago, or several years ago, that Council of Governments proposed that legislation so that towns could change the term for their first selectman. I think it's really important to have people in that seat that are drinking from the fire hose the first few years and then paying attention to the stuff that's coming up. One other thing I want to mention is bridges in our towns are inspected by the state. I've got 24 bridges in my town. So several years ago, the state decided that They would inspect the bridges over 20 feet, but the town's responsible for inspecting the bridges under 20 feet. Nobody told me that when I came into office. We have to pay for that. That's another unfunded mandate to maintain those under 20-foot bridges that are now my responsibility to have inspected. I'll turn over the floor.
Maureen, you talked a little bit, the conversation I think will lead us into some more about resiliency. But before we get there, I had a question I wanted to start with Brian on, because as a town manager, one thing that I think town managers are always known for in the work that they do is innovation. The ones that I've always surrounded myself with. I will tell you a very brief story. When I came to Connecticut, one of my first town visits was to a town very close to Tolland, the town of Coventry. And I sat and I met with the town manager of Coventry, who's now retired, but some of you probably come across him over the years, John L. Sesser. And I was really intrigued at how that conversation went, because John was really excited when I got there. And he sat down and he pulled up his computer and showed me where he found some street light kits on the Chinese Amazon site Alibaba, and how he was going to be able to bring these kits into Coventry, and well, you couldn't use them on the road, that you could use them to light the pathways, and you could use them to light the parks and areas that were typically dark. And he was working on trying to figure out, if I get these kits from Alibaba, can we service them? Can my people service them if something goes wrong? And do we have access to getting the parts? So he was on the phone actually with a translator and talking to these people in this factory over in China to see if they could send the parts to service these kits. And I thought, boy, I don't have this conversation in urban communities when I go there. Like, you talk about innovation, that really speaks to trying to address some of the challenges of a small town. And so, Brian, I want to talk about that a little bit in terms of what you're doing and seeing, and of course with all of you, but certainly starting with you as a town manager, of how innovation plays into this process.
So when I first got here, we had a unique position open up, a grants writer, and the town was wondering if we should fund it or not. And we also had our human services director helping all the people in need in our town, managing our construction grants, our construction projects and building projects. You know, in small towns, everyone's wearing 10 different hats. But I decided to, maybe we should pluck the project management and give it to the grants person. We found the right person for that, and having her a person with experience in project management, also applying for your grants, has paid off so much for us. She finds, this woman finds money in so many different places. We are also lucky to have the University of Connecticut a stone's throw away. And we're currently working with their engineering department and also the highway safety with Dr. Jackson that they have up there. They're actually, the students are engineering an issue, as you mentioned, walkability, where to connect two parts of our town, there's a choke point in a historic district, and how much fun is that to deal with, to try to widen the road and put sidewalks there, and for free. The students and staff at the UConn are putting together the engineering and design aspect of this for us. So very lucky to have UConn there. But, you know, another thing that people don't think about it, that I take very personally, is always say good things about your state and federal partners. And be as kind as you can publicly. We need our residents to have confidence in DOT, in DEEP, and everybody. So whenever I can, I'm going to say good things, even Eversource, if they respond to an emergency and such, say what you can, because it's only going to help you down the road in everyone having confidence in the town, and the state, and the feds, and, you know, down the road when someone thinks, do we want to work with your small town, and they know they're going to get a pat in the back, they know they're going to always have the support of that town publicly, only benefits you in the end. Thanks.
Maureen, you want to?
Yeah, I'll share with you. Recently, we had a culvert fail, and we had a sinkhole on one of our rural roads. It was a culvert that we didn't know we had, actually. So we tried. I consulted with other public works directors in other towns and our town engineer, and ultimately we decided on having an epoxy liner put in that culvert because it was down 20 feet and was difficult to get to and excavate. So we lined that culvert with an epoxy filler, which is new technology. Other towns came over to see how it was handled. It's kind of like the stuff you have put in your mouth when you have a crown done or something, and they line the culvert and then they put an ultraviolet light through it to harden the epoxy. And we're hoping that that's going to give us longevity and success, and if that works out, I'm sure that'll be a technology that we'll use in the future.
I would tend to agree with Brian a little bit about that. It was a lesson I had to learn early on because I tend to be small town, big mouth, and I think everyone will say that about me. But you at the same time as you're patting those state agencies on the back, you also have to be honest with them, just like our residents are honest with us when there are problems with those programs and when there is concern about how the funding sources are going out or when that money needs to go a little bit further. Not too critical, but just constructive feedback and criticism, which is something I had to learn quickly because I came from private sector construction, and construction is a whole different world, and private sector is a whole different world than public. So there's a lot of different agencies we have to work with. I think that we talk about innovation over the 14 years. We have found new ways to connect to the water line, which is there's water on part of our town and there's sewer on part of our town, but it's not through the rest of the town. With the ledge problem and rock problem, it's constant, but you're dealing with trenchless technology a lot of times, which helps to save a lot of money when you have to cross the state highway, or you have to go into a road maybe you just paved, and all of a sudden they had a water main break on that side of town. And sewer line infrastructure is another one that we're dealing with right now. We're doing a $500,000 steep project, thanks to the state for giving us that steep project. So, but they gave us the funding to take that on because our WPCA is small. It's only got 240 something users. It's tough to come up with the money to do a $500,000 project. So we were able to get a steep grant. What the town did was partner with WPCA and led in the application process to get that funding for them because they're a quasi-municipality in our community, and we became partners in that, and taking on that big sewer infrastructure project has been huge. One of the other things we're doing as a small town, as Brian said, and Maureen said, that we do a lot is wear different hats. So one of the things we're trying to do, and Harwinton has been leading it in the northwest corner to do, is regionalizing animal control. It doesn't sound like it's a big problem, but quite honestly, it's one of those problems that just doesn't go away the whole time you're in office. So we found new ways to make it accountable, actually investing in programming that makes it accountable, putting a lot of our services online, which makes it available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to all of our members of our community. I think those are things that small towns tend to hold back on because of funding or financing and things, but we find unique ways to fund it. We find partners in our communities to join together to help fund it, and I think that although we talk a lot about regionalization on the state level, small towns are already doing it. So I invite any of the big cities to come out and take a look at what we're doing in the small communities because we're forced to. The resources are just not there. You can't find the manpower. You have to resource together and you have to come together, and our Northwest Council of Governments has been amazing at putting together shared services for big equipment that small towns can't afford, whether it be stormwater maintenance equipment or any type of speed enforcement equipment, any of those types of things. So we rely on our Council of Governments to help us with a lot of that. But over the 14 years, a lot of the things that we're doing is and changing that mindset in a small community, I think, too, because a lot of people tell you we don't want to change. I'm a 5th generation in my community, so you can imagine the flack that I get from generational people that have been in the town that say, well, you've been here your whole life. How could you think like this? And I say, well, the reason is we have to move forward at some point, and it doesn't mean that we have to lose our rural character, but we have to move forward at some point. And the only way to do that is together, and that's what we typically do. So that's how we're able to fund some of that.
So it's interesting, we keep setting up like follow-up questions, and so I want to get back to you and start with you in a few minutes on the funding piece and the relationship with the state and the state agencies. But Maureen, I want to go back to what you had kind of set up prior, which is this conversation about resiliency. I think everybody is well aware, it's been well documented, obviously, the horrific storms and flooding that we had in Oxford and in the Naugatuck Valley just recently. Our organization released a resiliency report that was basically 2 years in the making. But I just want to ask the panelists, how are you dealing in your planning process for resiliency and what we know are climate change? More storms, more heavy storms than what we have ever experienced in the past. That intensity seems to continue to increase. And how is that impacting the way that you plan and the way that you implement projects going forward? I'll start with you, Maureen.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as Brian said, we're struggling because our budget competes with the ed budget. So we're having problems with that, and sometimes fixing a culvert isn't what people want to hear about when you're putting together a budget. We're trying, well, one of the things that we've done is, excuse me, when I got a phone call one day several years ago that I had a bridge that was in trouble and I was going to have to do repairs to that bridge. I didn't know anything about it, so I started asking questions and got involved in this and that and the other thing, and found the state local bridge program, which requires a 20% match. And we couldn't meet the match, and the bridge needed to be fixed at a time frame that was not doable with that program. We did fix the bridge, and then we had another 100-year event storm that did additional damage to it. Fortunately now, the local federal bridge program is accepting bridges in that program, and they cover the project 100%. That's going to help my community hugely, because I got 3 bridges in that program now. So we'll have 3 bridges replaced out of our 12. Next year, the 27 and 28. But that's a big deal for us. But some of the programs we talked about earlier, we can't make the match on them. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to upscale some of our culverts that need to be replaced and enlarged. I don't know yet how we're going to pay for those. And I've got culverts all over town. I don't even know where they are. Yeah. So it's discovery, and it's kind of like whack-a-mole.
It is.
Brian, did you want to?
Yeah, so we had a unique thing bubble up this year in our town. We have this great gymnastics business in town, small business. They decided to build their own standalone building along a state road. And for years they had been in design with an engineer company that's been in our town forever. And the engineer companies worked with DOT forever. And during this last couple of years, while designing it, they had come to an agreement of what the water runoff onto the state road would look like. Well, as luck would have it, we had one of our 100-year storms, which seemed to be coming about every 5 to 10 years now, and DOT moved the goalposts on us. And I don't say that in a negative way. They had to. I understand the weather patterns are changing. So it's going to cost this gymnastics facility about $300,000 more than they had expected to, and for a gymnastics small business, that is a ton of money to lay out there. But they have to, and so how do we as a municipality start communicating that to new businesses coming in? And we are, and we will begin to do that. But these storms, these runoffs, we're not built for them right now. And you know, I'm no weather activist by any stretch, but I grew up playing hockey in this state, and we skated on the ponds all winter. That doesn't happen anymore. You can maybe skate on the ponds once or twice for a few days at best, when we would do that all winter, and that just does not happen anymore. So things are changing. We're getting more water than we ever have, and we want to manage it. It's also, we have impacts on our drinking water, as I'll get into that more when I have an opportunity to, but we're almost all wells out in Tolland, and so we have some issues with salt, be it from trucks and from water softeners. I believe the latter. But the issues of weather patterns changing on us are now affecting municipalities and small business with water runoff, just everything, that our climate has already changed here in the state.
Yeah, I think that Brian hit on a good spot, is that the sodium and salt has been an issue with the rural communities, and when you've got state highways that run through them, it's up to small towns to prove who's responsible for the contamination, and that can get pretty costly. I can tell you that in the last few years, it's cost our town a little over $100,000 in the last 2 years, and we're looking at another $150,000, $200,000 to address salt issues that may or may not be ours. I would love to see a better partnership with DEEP and the program in trying to determine what we're going to do about the salt problem, because it's going to be like the crumbling foundation problem, where we're going to be faced with this, because there is so many wells still in Connecticut. I mean, down in Torrington, where they have city water capabilities, they have wells, and that's going to be a growing issue as we continue to go. And there's a lot of parameters that go into that. Is it below grade? Is it town runoff? Is it state runoff? Is it local runoff? Is it the house next door? Do they have a saltwater pool? All the things that you have to do as a town leader to look into those things. But I think that as I'm learning that 5-year plans are no longer, with the weather change, are no longer 5-year plans. They become 1-year plans, because the weather changing so much that you have to be fluid enough, even as a small town, to change with that weather pattern and with those times. And that's why roads and construction and stuff in at least in our community take a while, because you don't want to just go in and pave and just replace the pipe from steel to plastic. You want to increase that size. You want to make sure you have the proper flow. You want to make sure you have the proper wing walls. You have the proper riprap to handle all the water flow that we are getting. And with such a small commercial base, all of our commercial base is right on the state highway. So it's then partnering with DOT to try to figure out how we handle the runoff from the state highways going into these parking lots, but also how they handle it once it gets into the parking lot to get it out. So you have to partner with a lot of those in those small communities. So.
Randy, did you have something?
Yeah, I'd like to build on that a little bit. So the salt in our waters, there's no doubt putting salt on the roads is not good for our drinking water. That's indisputable. But is that the major cause of what's causing drinking water problems in our town? And we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars now in litigation and everything else trying to figure this out. And what we found is that the water softener industry is the Wild West. There is no regulation. Back in the late 90s, they built a massive development in our town, massive for Tolland, 80 or so homes over this area, and the water was fine prior to the homes going in. Small business in town, everyone loves the kid. I went to high school with him. He opens a water softening business, and you get a water softener, you get a water softener, everyone gets a water softener in this neighborhood. And now their water is in all kinds of issues with it, obviously. Somebody wants to blame it on the salt that we're putting on the roads, and we couldn't be doing it in a more responsible fashion there. And we ended up hiring a consultant to start testing everything, looking at the water when the neighborhoods are built and looking at everything. The company was so good, they were able to tell us by water testing who had what type of, they have a Culligan system because this chemical's in there and so now we are starting to lean on DPH and DEEP to start coming up with some legislation and controls on when you can put a water softener in, the limits, how often, so that the well water stays clean. Anyone that's having complaints about salt in their wells, look at the water softeners. My mom was on the list when I got hired. She was one of the ones with bad water. The day I got hired, or the day after, I went in her house and shut off the water softener system. A woman down the hill from her had salt in her water. Well, no pun intended, 2.5 years later now, the woman down the hill, her water is now fine, and she's off the danger levels, and her water's back to normal. So in all likelihood, my mom's water softener system was affecting her well water downhill. And I sit in my mom's yard and look uphill. We don't know who has a water softener system there. Again, it is the Wild West. There is no controls on it. So we need DPH to try to build these in. We need the cooperation with DEEP, because DEEP can force you there's a law where they can force you to provide somebody with clean drinking water. We already deliver bottles to a whole bunch of people, but they can force you to dig a well. You know, they can force you to do a water line essentially from somewhere. And like I said, for us to run water lines all over town is, you know, I have to say billions. It'd be a massive project. So we are looking for legislators really to start looking at these water softener, the water softener industry, and put some controls on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I want to shift back to what Mike had kind of opened the door. I think we have right around 10 minutes, maybe a little less, and this is an important conversation. The conversation about money, and the conversation of the partnership. We're talking about the partnership with the state, but also, as mentioned, the partnership with the legislature. Maureen had mentioned the issue with the matching dollars, and not being able to come up with the matching dollars. To give an example of how important that partnership is, when COVID first happened and we had this massive amount of ARPA dollars that were coming into the state, and a lot of people and a lot of the recommendations were to use that money on like infrastructure, on one-time costs, on buildings, on all of those types of things, not things that built the budget going forward because the dollars would run out. Well, the example Maureen gave, a great example of where you could take ARPA dollars and use those for the town match and put those up against the state funds. There was a statute that prohibited it. There was a statute that said that towns could not use federal dollars as part of the match against state funding. Right. And we were able to go and work with the General Assembly after that during the session and work with state agencies and say, this doesn't make sense. Like, we have all of these dollars coming in for this purpose, and we can't get these projects done because of this statute that was probably never meant for this purpose. Unfortunately, you know, we had legislators who absolutely agreed. We had state agencies that backed that position and supported that change. But I think that really speaks to why that relationship is so important between the towns and the state and the General Assembly. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out to you to give you a little opportunity to talk about, if you're looking at these agencies and speaking to them directly about how they can help, where we can tear down, perhaps like you had mentioned, Mike, you know, talking about things that aren't working, where we can tear down some of those borders. And also specifically, I mean, we have a camera back here. I don't know who's watching it, but if you're looking right in it and you're speaking to state legislators, we have a session coming up. And what can they do this session immediately that could help communities with these infrastructure challenges? I'll start with you. Yeah, you missed the planning meeting, so I'm starting with you to make you the hardest question there. So,
you know, the relationship with the legislators is key. I think that whether you're a big city or a small town, if you don't have a good relationship with your legislators, it's going to be detrimental to getting anything done. First of all, and getting those inroads to the state agencies. So they assist in a lot of that, and we have some great representatives and senators across the state that do that every single day, open those doors and allow those conversations to happen. But I think, you know, when you see an 80-20 match on a project and you couldn't use federal dollars to match that, for a small town like ours, you know, 20% of a project could be $250,000, $300,000, and you're going to your small town meeting, because we're still statutory, so a lot of people say, what's a town meeting? A town meeting is, I can't spend one nickel. The Board of Finance can say you're going to spend the money, but they can only do up to $20,000. So everything else has got to go to town meeting, and then you get a packed room of a town meeting of all people that are going to tell you whether they want to spend the money or not. And you may think it's a great project and you're going to bring it forward, but that's a hurdle on a small town level that you have to overcome if you're still a statutory town. If you don't have a charter or anything like that that allows the first selectman to make those decisions or work within a contingency budget, you don't have that ability, that flexibility to make that 20% match off the top. And I think when you're talking about legislation for this long session, I think a lot of things come up. You know, we talk about affordable housing, how small towns don't have the infrastructure for it. How are you going to get there? We share infrastructure with Torrington, the city of Torrington right now, and that's a partnership.
So now that there's only a couple of minutes left, do you want to bring up affordable housing?
No, I do not. I do not want to bring up affordable housing. But you know, those are the things, and I think legislature, if they could clear the road on a lot of things, you know, and the hurdles for us this session, and sit down with us and talk to us about that, we can get a lot of those projects done. But definitely don't want to talk about affordable housing.
Brian or Maureen, I know we have a question here and a few minutes left, but do you want to add to that before?
Yeah, I'll jump, unless you want to go more.
No, go ahead.
You know, we in Tolland, we have you know, not to get political, but 2 Republicans as our state rep and our senator. And coming from where I came from prior to here, I understand, you know, it can be tough getting money and getting things done under the gold dome down the street if you have an R in front of your name. So, you know, I always look to hopefully have some balance, but again, it comes to having good relationships. That being said, both our senator and Republican are always knocking on our door at Town Hall. How can we help? What is going on? If there's anything they can do to help shake things along, they do assist us as best they can. For me, it comes back to, again, we don't have the financing for any infrastructure. And it doesn't matter. I can tell you, we don't have the money. Whatever you're going to ask for, we don't have the money for it. And you know, forget about these infrastructure projects. So having that grants writer, and I know the smaller towns it's harder, but she's paid for herself over the next couple decades already in the first 2 years. A regional grants writer's not a bad idea either, and I know, you know, you're taking advantage of CROG and CCM and COST and all your groups, but our grants writer, she just brought in $100,000 for, I don't want to tell you, on another project. So she's having that, it has been so helpful. And that ARPA money, we had such a great system in Tolland to make sure that we did not waste it, and it was a committee that would make recommendations to our town council. You know, we have 7 miles of unimproved roads, dirt roads in Tolland, and we bought ARPA money. We bought a used box grader. You don't know what that is, but after it rains, it comes out and reshapes the road. And so to have one of those ready to go, you know, through ARPA, we would have never bought that. I would have told him no and go pound sand, my DPW director, if he wanted to buy one of those. But thanks to ARPA, we do. It makes our unimproved roads, which I'd love to get rid of. And the opposite in Tolland, anyone that lives on a dirt road doesn't want to, for the most part. Yeah. But again, it's the stormwater. I mean, I could skin some pavement over any road in Tolland, but you know, it's getting that infrastructure underneath that is really the costly part. Thanks.
Maureen, 1 minute, and then we're going to go to a question and wrap it up.
I'll just add you know, the things that are coming back onto the towns, like the under 20 bridge inventory, or I don't deal with it yet, and I'm afraid that it's coming my way, is the stormwater management requirement. That's something that the towns would have to pay for, that we have no expertise on how to do that, or who to call, or where to go. Those kinds of things, they just make it harder for smaller communities when there's just so many other things going on that we're dealing with every day. Actually, I did just get a text from somebody who thanked me for fixing their pothole. So,
Rob,
thank you.
I know we're coming up on a commercial break. You had a... Yeah, please, if whoever...
Good morning, or close to afternoon. I've had a privilege of having conversations with a lot of rural leadership, specifically on not only plow drivers and public work staff, water supply operators, wastewater supply operators, assistant building officials, and building officials. That seems to be a very punitive thing to specifically a rural town for economic development. It prohibits economic development because sometimes you don't have a building official. Other than CCM, CROGS, and COST, who we've done wonderful work with on this initiative, how have you as small towns address what we all call the silver tsunami of those with institutional knowledge? How are you attracting the new people to replace them? Because they are an asset and will stop economic development in all of your towns. I was wondering if you can address that. Thank you.
I think one of the things in Harwinton, what we've done is change our pay structure. That's the first thing you got to do in a small community, is change that pay structure. Building officials, at least most of them in the northwest corner, worked on a commission-based percentage of the permits. Well, that's ebb and flow. It's just like any other construction. It goes up and down, and you really can't plan a life around a percentage. And a lot of them were part-time. They were, come in a couple hours a day and give some permits out. What we did was change it to a base pay, and we incentivized him that once him or her, whoever gets into the industry, it is difficult to attract them, but you have to have a base pay to keep them around. You got to make it palatable for them to stay. And in right now, let's be honest, I mean, it's not palatable to stay anywhere unless you're getting $60,000 as a base. That's your base. That's where you start. And then you incentivize it by getting them someone just to process the paperwork inside. So that they can focus on inspecting, because building officials don't want to do paperwork. At least that's my experience with building officials. They don't want to do paperwork. But I think changing those, because you're going to have that with zoning enforcement officers, you're going to have that with land use clerks, that knowledge leaving. The way we've been able to attract and fill those positions is not only reorganizing how we pay, but reorganizing the departments too, and spreading that work out so that when you lose that cog, you don't lose the whole department. Because a lot of these departments are one-person departments. And if you can keep someone in there that can keep the operation going and float it long enough so that you can find another building official or reach out to another town and say, hey, listen, can you cover me for 3 weeks while I look for somebody? That's part of the obstacle that you have to overcome. But that's how we've been able to do it here in Harwinton.
Folks, I think we're out of time. I know I am, because I have a date with Gino Ariema coming up here in a few minutes, so I don't want to miss that. But I know I would think that based off of their schedules, if you have some questions afterwards, I'm sure that some of them would be happy to engage with you as well. But I just wanted to thank Rob, Commissioner Boughton, others for giving us the opportunity, and thank these panelists for being, and thank you for being here today. We appreciate it.